The railroad foreman hit solid rock on August 14, 1883, 2 miles east of where Kentucky and Tennessee meet. When the pickaxe broke through the packed dirt that morning, it uncovered bones that were over 7 feet long. What they found under that hill would challenge everything written about who lived in these mountains. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad had bought the land through a deal that didn't require much surveying. The land in this part of the Cumberland Gap had been thought of as too far away for people to live in, too steep for farming, and too far from towns to need careful study. Maps from the 1850s showed the area as mostly unexplored land, marked only with rough height measurements and the note, "difficult passage." Local Cherokee families stayed away from the area completely, though they gave no explanation to the railroad company workers who asked about possible problems with construction. Silas Drummond had supervised digging projects throughout Tennessee and southern Kentucky for nearly 20 years. He understood soil types, water drainage, and the challenges of mountain land. When his lead digger, a German immigrant named Hinrich Vogel, called him to look at the exposed section that August morning, Drummond thought they had found a natural cave, or perhaps an old mining tunnel from an earlier unknown settlement attempt. What lay beneath the disturbed earth was neither. The hole measured about 12 feet long and 6 feet across at its widest point. Vogel had cleared enough dirt to show a planned arrangement of stones forming a rough chamber. The construction showed no cement or binding material, just carefully fitted rocks creating a sealed space beneath several feet of built-up soil and tree roots. The positioning suggested someone meant to bury something here rather than a natural rock formation. Drummond ordered his crew to expand the dig carefully, treating the site as they would any unexpected find that might delay construction or require records for the company's legal protection. By mid-afternoon, they had uncovered the full size of the chamber. Inside, partly covered by centuries of mineral deposits and rotting plant matter, lay bones of extraordinary size. The skull alone measured larger than any Drummond had seen in previous digs where accidental grave disturbances had happened. The long bone, still partly connected despite the passage of time, suggested a person who would have stood well over 7 feet tall. The bone thickness appeared unusual even to Drummond's untrained eye, heavier and thicker than normal human bone structure. Drummond sent a rider to the nearest town, a coal mining settlement called Penneville, about 18 miles southwest. His instructions said they needed a doctor or anyone with medical training who could examine the remains and provide records. The railroad company required detailed reports on any discoveries that might create legal problems or delays. He also asked that local authorities be told, though he doubted the county sheriff would travel such a distance for what appeared to be a very old burial site with no obvious crime connections. Dr. Nathaniel Ashford arrived 2 days later, having traveled from Penneville with a deputy sheriff who seemed more interested in the railroad construction than the dug-up remains. Ashford had practiced medicine in the area for 30 years, having moved from Philadelphia after the war. He had examined many skeletal remains during his career, including those from battlefield recoveries and accidental discoveries during farm work. What he wrote in his first report that afternoon would eventually reach medical institutions and archaeological societies across the eastern United States. The measurements Ashford recorded showed a skeleton of remarkable size and unusual proportions. The person would have stood between 7 feet 4 inches and 7 feet 8 inches tall with bone structure suggesting exceptional physical strength. The skull showed features Ashford could not easily describe, showing characteristics that seemed inconsistent with the area's documented physical traits. He noted these observations in his field journal with careful precision, knowing that his findings would likely face doubt from colleagues who had not examined the remains directly. As the sun set behind the ridgeline that evening, Drummond's crew covered the dig site and posted guards. Ashford remained at the camp, writing detailed notes by lamplight and drawing the skeletal arrangement from multiple angles. Neither man realized they had uncovered the first of many such burials, or that this discovery would open questions about Appalachian history that would remain unanswered for generations to come. Word of the discovery spread through academic circles with unexpected speed. By late September of 1883, 3 separate university expeditions had arrived at the railroad dig site. Professor Edmund Thornley from Yale brought surveying equipment and a team of graduate students. Dr. Ephraim Blackburn traveled from the Smithsonian Institution with permission to document and possibly transport significant finds to Washington. A smaller group from the University of Virginia arrived with geological instruments and photography equipment, determined to establish whether the burial represented a single odd case or part of a larger pattern. The railroad company reluctantly granted access to the site, though construction delays cost them nearly $2,000 per week. Silas Drummond remained on location, coordinating between the academic teams and company officials who wanted the matter resolved quickly. The dig expanded carefully over the following weeks, revealing a complexity that nobody had expected. What they had initially thought to be a single burial chamber proved to be the entrance to a large mound structure covering nearly 3 acres of previously undisturbed highland land. Thornley's team mapped the site with precision, documenting 17 separate burial chambers arranged in 3 circular rings around a central location. The outer ring contained 12 chambers, each holding skeletal remains similar in size and proportion to the first discovery. The middle ring held 4 burials positioned at north, south, east, and west compass points, while the innermost ring contained a single massive chamber that appeared to hold multiple people whose remains had become mixed together over the centuries. Each skeleton measured between 7 feet and 7 feet 10 inches in length. Blackburn conducted detailed skull measurements across multiple specimens, finding consistent characteristics that set these people apart from any documented population in North America. The skulls showed pronounced brow ridges, unusually large eye sockets, and jaw structures suggesting powerful bite force. Bone density measurements exceeded normal human ranges by significant amounts. The thigh bones alone weighed nearly twice what Blackburn would have expected for their length, suggesting either exceptional muscle mass during life or fundamental differences in bone makeup. The positioning of the remains suggested planned ritual burial practices. Bodies had been placed in extended positions facing eastward with arms crossed over the chest. Several burials included grave goods, though these items showed severe damage from centuries of soil exposure. Pieces of what appeared to be worked metal lay scattered in 3 chambers, too corroded for accurate identification. Stone tools found in other burials showed skilled craftsmanship, particularly a series of blades with handles clearly designed for much larger hands than normal human proportions would require. Dr. Blackburn tried to talk with local Cherokee families about the site's historical context. The nearest settlement, a small community called Wolf Creek, about 9 miles northeast, housed several families with deep generational ties to the region. Blackburn visited twice during October of 1883, accompanied by a translator familiar with Cherokee language and customs. The conversations proved frustrating and ultimately unsuccessful. Elders acknowledged knowing about the location, but refused to discuss its meaning. One elder, a man named Standing Bear, who appeared to be in his 70s, stated simply that the place belonged to those who came before, and that disturbing it would bring consequences the white men did not understand. When Blackburn pressed for more details about who these people had been, Standing Bear's response offered no comfort. He described them only as the old ones who lived in the high places, who took what they wanted from the valleys below, and who vanished when the earth turned against them. He refused to explain more despite Blackburn's continued questions, finally walking away from the conversation completely when the doctor suggested that surely these were simply unusually tall ancestors of the current Cherokee population. The academic teams left by mid-November as winter weather made the mountain location increasingly difficult to work in. They transported selected bone specimens, took extensive photographs, and left detailed maps of the burial complex. Railroad construction resumed in early December. By March of 1884, the mound had been flattened, the bones reburied in a single mass grave 3 miles from the original location, and the tracks completed on schedule. The official railroad company records made no mention of the delay or its cause. Blackburn published early findings in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology in June of 1884, describing a population of exceptional height living in the Cumberland Gap region at an unknown date before documented Cherokee settlement. The article created immediate controversy. Critics questioned the measurements, suggested exaggeration or wrong identification, and demanded access to the physical specimens for independent checking. That access would never be granted. The Smithsonian specimens disappeared from institutional storage sometime between 1887 and 1891. Dr. Blackburn's careful documentation remained, but the physical evidence he had transported to Washington vanished without explanation. Transfer records showed the bones moved between facilities 3 times during that period. Each move was noted with standard administrative language about space limits and collection reorganization. The final entry, dated March of 1891, showed placement in a secure storage area that later archivists could never locate. What survived were Blackburn's notes and a growing collection of historical accounts that suggested the railroad burial mound represented far more than a single discovery. Father Augustine Mercier, a Jesuit missionary who had worked among Cherokee and Shawnee communities between 1792 and 1814, left detailed journals now kept at Georgetown University. His writings described oral traditions consistent across multiple tribal groups, all mentioning a previous population of exceptional height and pale skin who had lived in the highest mountain valleys before Cherokee memory began. Mercier recorded these accounts with scholarly precision, noting dates, locations, and the names of his sources. A Shawnee elder named Red Hawk, interviewed near present-day Lexington in 1798, described the ancient ones as standing tall as 2 men with skin like winter snow and eyes that reflected firelight like animal eyes. They lived in stone houses carved into cliff faces, grew crops on narrow mountain terraces, and came down to the valleys only to hunt and take livestock from the settlements below. Red Hawk claimed his grandfather's grandfather had seen one of these beings from a distance during a hunting trip, watching from a ridgeline before disappearing into the high country. Cherokee accounts documented by Mercier between 1803 and 1811 offered similar descriptions with disturbing consistency. Multiple sources from separate communities with no apparent contact with one another described the same physical characteristics and behavioral patterns. The beings lived apart from other populations, maintained fortified positions in high land, and possessed strength that made them dangerous opponents in the rare conflicts that occurred. One account from a woman named Cornflower, recorded in 1808 near the Hiwassee River, described an incident from her childhood where her village lost 3 hunters who went too far into the forbidden high country. Their bodies were found weeks later, arranged in a clearing as a warning. The most detailed account came from a Cherokee physician named Whitepath, whom Mercier interviewed extensively during the winter of 1813. Whitepath claimed his people's oral history divided into separate periods, with the time before the Pale Giants vanished considered a separate era from current memory. He described the giants as builders of stone fortifications still visible throughout the mountains, though most had been reclaimed by forest growth. They grew different crops than the Cherokee, hunted different game, and spoke a language that no living person understood. Their disappearance happened gradually, according to the stories Whitepath had learned from his elders. First, they moved deeper into the mountains. Then their numbers shrank until finally only abandoned structures remained as evidence they had existed at all. Mercier's journals sat in Georgetown's archives for nearly 8 decades before a doctoral student named Margaret Sinclair discovered them in 1896 while researching frontier religious missions. She recognized the potential importance immediately, particularly given the recent Cumberland Gap discoveries. Sinclair spent 2 years cross-checking Mercier's accounts with other historical sources, finding supporting evidence in settlers' journals, frontier military reports, and even occasional newspaper accounts from the early 1800s. A Virginia militia report from 1807, found in state archives, described an expedition into the Cumberland Mountains to investigate reports of hostile activity. The commanding officer, Captain Jonas Whitfield, noted discovering stone fortifications of unknown origin at extreme heights, far beyond any documented settlement activity. His description of the construction matched details in Cherokee accounts collected by Mercier, suggesting sophisticated defensive positions designed for use by a large population. Sinclair published her findings in 1901, arguing that multiple independent sources proved a separate pre-Cherokee population in the Appalachian highlands. The academic response ranged from polite doubt to complete dismissal. Without physical evidence to examine, most scholars treated the accounts as mythological rather than historical, regardless of their consistency across sources and cultures. The stone walls existed exactly where the historical accounts claimed they would. Between 1903 and 1907, geological survey teams conducting mineral assessments throughout eastern Kentucky and western Virginia documented extensive stone fortifications at heights exceeding 3,000 feet. The structures appeared on official survey maps with notes indicating unknown origin and uncertain age. Most showed significant wear from centuries of weather exposure and plant overgrowth, but their planned construction remained unmistakable. Survey engineer Harold Pittman led expeditions into the most remote sections of the Cumberland Range during the summer of 1905. His team discovered a complex of walls and earthworks covering nearly 8 miles of ridgeline land positioned to command views of 3 separate valleys below. The walls stood between 4 and 7 feet tall where they remained whole, built from limestone blocks weighing several hundred pounds each. No cement bound the stones together, yet the fitting showed precision that required considerable engineering knowledge. Gaps in the walls occurred at regular spaces, suggesting planned entrances or defensive positions rather than simple decay. Pittman's most important finding came from careful examination of the construction methods. The blocks showed tool marks inconsistent with Cherokee or Shawnee tools documented in archaeological records. The cutting pattern suggested metal tools of large size used with force that required exceptional physical strength. Several stones had marks where they had been split along natural crack lines, then shaped to fit specific positions in the wall structure. The labor involved in moving these blocks to such extreme heights would have required either large work crews or people of unusual physical ability. Earthworks went along with the stone fortifications in several locations. These consisted of raised platforms behind the walls, creating high positions for defenders to watch approaches from below. The platforms showed evidence of wooden structures at some point in the past, though only soil discoloration and occasional post holes remained. Pittman estimated the fortifications could have housed a population of several hundred people if used continuously, or served as seasonal defensive positions for a larger group spread across multiple sites. Dating the structures proved impossible with available methods. No organic material survived in good enough condition for analysis. The weathering pattern suggested extreme age, certainly before European contact and likely before documented Cherokee settlement of the region. Pittman noted in his field reports that local Cherokee families continued to avoid the fortification sites, refusing to go with survey teams into those areas despite offers of payment for guide services. A second survey team working independently in Western Virginia during 1906 made discoveries that supported Pittman's findings. Led by cartographer Ezra Calhoun, this expedition documented similar fortifications along a ridgeline system about 40 miles northeast of Pittman's primary site. The Virginia structures showed identical construction methods and strategic positioning, suggesting a coordinated defensive network rather than isolated outposts. Calhoun's team found evidence of quarrying operations at lower heights where limestone had been taken out and presumably transported uphill for wall construction. The amount of stone involved suggested decades of sustained effort. Most disturbing were the sight lines. Someone standing atop these fortifications during daylight hours could watch movement across vast stretches of valley floor. Smoke from cooking fires approaching travelers, even livestock movements would have been visible from these positions. The valleys below contained prime hunting grounds and river access, yet the fortification builders had chosen to live on the barren, exposed ridgelines instead. The defensive advantage was obvious, but the choice meant a population that feared attack or preferred separation from those living at lower heights. Military historians who reviewed the survey reports noted the skill of the defensive positioning. These were not simple shelters or temporary camps. They represented sustained living by a group that understood tactical advantages, invested enormous labor in fortification construction, and maintained control of strategic highland land for an extended period. Yet no written record documented their existence, and no artifacts beyond the stone works themselves survived to show who had built them or when they had finally abandoned these positions. The frontier journals told a different story than the academic debate suggested. Between 1750 and 1780, settlers pushing into the Appalachian interior documented experiences that lined up disturbingly well with indigenous oral traditions. These accounts, scattered across county historical societies and family archives, remained largely ignored by researchers focused on official government records and institutional sources. Isaac Hartley kept a detailed journal during his family's settlement attempts in what would become eastern Kentucky. His entries from 1762 describe losing livestock under circumstances that went against normal predator patterns. 3 cows vanished from a fenced pasture overnight in June of that year with no blood trail or signs of struggle. The fence rails had been removed and stacked neatly to one side, then put back after the animals were taken. Hartley noted that no Cherokee or Shawnee hunting party he had met would bother with such careful property handling, and the sheer weight of the fence rails suggested whoever moved them had considerable strength. A more disturbing entry from October of 1763 described Hartley's oldest son returning from a hunting trip with an account that left the family sleeping with loaded muskets for weeks afterward. The boy, 16 years old and experienced in mountain travel, claimed he had been tracked for several hours by something moving parallel to his position along a ridgeline above. He never saw the figure clearly, only glimpses through the trees of something much taller than a normal man moving with clear purpose. When he finally came down to lower heights and entered denser forest, the presence stopped following. The boy refused to hunt alone in the high country after that incident. Similar accounts appeared in journals from Virginia and Tennessee territories. Margaret Bradshaw, a midwife who traveled extensively through frontier settlements, recorded an incident from 1774 in her personal letters. A family living in an isolated valley reported that their 12-year-old daughter had disappeared while gathering firewood near dusk. Search parties found no trace of the child for 3 days. On the 4th day, her body was discovered 8 miles from the homestead, placed on a rock outcropping at a height that required hours of difficult climbing. The positioning appeared planned rather than the result of an animal attack. No predator damage marked the remains, and the cause of death could not be determined. The most detailed account came from a militia officer named Benjamin Hodge, who led patrols through contested territory during the period of frontier conflicts in the 1770s. His official reports, kept in Virginia State Archives, included an entry from August of 1777 that his superiors apparently chose not to pursue. Hodge described finding a temporary camp at high height that showed signs of recent use. The fire pit contained bones from a deer broken open to remove marrow. The breaking force had shattered the thigh bones completely, something Hodge noted would require strength beyond normal human ability, or the use of heavy tools that would leave different break patterns. Footprints in soft soil near the camp measured considerably larger than Hodge or any of his men could make. He estimated the person who made them would stand between 7 and 8 feet tall based on stride length and depth of impression in the ground. His patrol followed the tracks for about 2 miles before losing them on rocky ground. Hodge finished his report by recommending that future patrols avoid the highest heights during summer months when these people appeared most active. The reports effectively stopped after 1785. Whether this showed actual changes in how often encounters happened or simply a shift in what frontier families thought worth documenting remains unclear. By the early 1800s, accounts of unusual sightings became rare enough that most blamed them on exaggeration or wrong identification. The mountains kept their secrets as new generations of settlers arrived who knew nothing of what their predecessors had witnessed in the high country. The digs between 1884 and 1891 revealed something more disturbing than unusual bone sizes. Physical anthropologists examining the recovered remains found evidence of widespread health collapse occurring across an entire population within a relatively short time frame. Dr. Blackburn's detailed bone analysis, conducted before the specimens vanished from Smithsonian storage, documented patterns consistent with severe nutritional problems, epidemic disease, and traumatic injury occurring at the same time. Bone porosity in multiple specimens showed chronic malnutrition during the final years of life. The condition affected people across different age ranges, suggesting widespread food shortage rather than isolated cases of individual illness. Blackburn noted this finding with particular attention because the bone structure of these people suggested they had been physically powerful during earlier life periods. The deterioration represented a dramatic decline from what had clearly been a strong population. Lesions on several skulls and long bones showed characteristics consistent with infectious disease, though Blackburn could not identify the specific germ responsible. The pattern of bone involvement suggested something that spread rapidly through close contact populations. 3 specimens from the central burial chamber showed evidence of the same disease process, showing they likely died within a similar time frame. The bone changes required months or years to develop, meaning these people suffered extended illness before death. More disturbing were the trauma patterns. 7 skeletons showed evidence of violent death. Fractures to skulls, ribs, and arm bones showed healing that never completed, showing these injuries occurred at or near the time of death. The force required to cause such damage would have been substantial. 2 skulls showed depressed fractures consistent with blunt force trauma from above, as though the people had been struck while kneeling or lying down. Defense wounds marked the forearm bones of 3 specimens, suggesting they had raised their arms to protect themselves during attack. The burial arrangement itself suggested hurried burial during a crisis period. Unlike the careful positioning clear in the older outer ring burials, the central chamber showed bodies placed with less ceremony. Some remained partly connected in ways suggesting they had been wrapped in organic material that later decayed. Others showed signs of having been moved after initial decomposition began elsewhere, then reburied in this location. The soil layers showed multiple burial events occurring within a span of perhaps 5 to 10 years, concentrated around what Blackburn estimated to be 900 to 1100 CE based on comparing burial practices from other regional sites. Artifact analysis provided additional evidence of population stress. The later burials contained fewer grave goods than earlier burials. Tools found in the outer ring chambers showed skilled craftsmanship, while items from the central area appeared hastily made or represented salvaged tools from earlier periods. One burial contained a stone blade that had been broken and handled multiple times, its edge worn nearly smooth from repeated sharpening. This suggested either shortage of suitable stone for tool making or inability to access traditional quarrying sites. Most telling was the absence of children's remains. The 17 burials documented at the railroad site included no people under about 15 years of age based on bone development markers. Either children were buried elsewhere, which would contradict the apparent family grouping clear in the central chamber, or the population had stopped producing children that survived to burial age. Both possibilities pointed to a community in terminal decline. Cherokee oral traditions collected by Father Mercier included references to a great dying time when the old ones weakened and could no longer defend their high places. The accounts described this period as lasting perhaps 2 generations, during which the pale giants pulled back from lower heights and eventually disappeared completely. The bone evidence supported these oral histories with uncomfortable precision, documenting not just the existence of this population but the manner of their extinction. The final sightings came from sources considered reliable by frontier standards. Between 1790 and 1850, documented encounters with exceptionally tall people in remote mountain regions occurred with enough frequency to appear in official letters, missionary records, and travelers' journals. These accounts differed significantly from the terror-filled reports of earlier decades. Instead, they described what appeared to be remaining populations struggling to survive in increasingly isolated circumstances. A circuit preacher named Reverend Tobias Landry kept detailed records of his travels through mountain communities between 1798 and 1823. His journals, kept at the Kentucky Historical Society, included 3 separate encounters with people he described as being of remarkable height and unusual appearance. The first occurred in August of 1802 near the headwaters of the Cumberland River. Landry wrote that he watched from a distance of perhaps 200 yards a family group consisting of 2 adults and what appeared to be a teenager. They were gathering plants in a high meadow, collecting plants that Landry could not identify from his position. When they became aware of his presence, they retreated rapidly into dense forest cover. Landry noted their height exceeded any person he had met, estimating the adults stood between 7 and 8 feet tall. His second sighting, documented in June of 1814, proved more disturbing. While traveling between settlements, Landry came upon a shelter built from branches and bark at a height he estimated exceeded 4,000 feet. The structure appeared recently abandoned. Inside he found evidence of long-term living, including basic sleeping arrangements, fire-blackened stones, and scattered animal bones. The scale of the shelter suggested occupants of unusual size. Most troubling was a grave marker built from stacked stones nearby. Landry noted that whatever or whoever had been buried there had been interred with great care, the stones arranged in a pattern suggesting ritual importance. Similar encounters appeared in government correspondence. A land surveyor named Nathan Pryor reported to Tennessee territorial authorities in 1819 about meeting 3 people of extraordinary height while mapping property boundaries in a contested mountain region. Pryor's official report described them as appearing malnourished and wearing clothing made from animal hides in a style unlike any indigenous group he had met. They made no threatening gestures but watched his survey team from high positions for several hours before disappearing. Pryor noted their presence complicated his ability to complete accurate measurements, as his crew refused to work in areas where these people might be observing. The most detailed late-period account came from a fur trapper named Ezekiel Drummond, whose personal journal appeared in a West Virginia state sale in 1937. Drummond described an extended encounter during the winter of 1843 when he sheltered in a cave system during a severe snowstorm. He discovered the cave already occupied by an elderly man and woman of exceptional height. Despite obvious physical decline, the man still stood well over 7 feet tall. They communicated through gestures as Drummond spoke no language they understood, and they spoke no English or Cherokee. Drummond remained in the cave for 4 days while the storm continued. He noted that the couple had few belongings beyond basic survival tools and appeared to be suffering from inadequate nutrition. The woman showed signs of advanced illness, coughing frequently and unable to move without help. When the weather cleared, Drummond left, leaving behind most of his food supplies. He returned to the location the following spring out of curiosity. The cave showed no signs of recent use. Outside the entrance, he found 2 graves marked with the same stacked stone pattern Reverend Landry had documented 30 years earlier. After 1850, such accounts stopped completely. Whether the last people of this population finally died from disease, starvation, or simply moved beyond, all contact remained unknown. The mountains fell silent on the matter, and a new generation of settlers arrived who had never heard the old stories. By 1900, the physical evidence had effectively vanished. Dr. Blackburn's transported specimens disappeared from Smithsonian records without explanation. Bone remains from later digs met similar fates. A mining operation in eastern Kentucky uncovered a burial site containing 5 skeletons of unusual size in 1898. The bones were reportedly sent to the University of Pennsylvania for analysis. No record of their arrival exists in university archives. A construction crew working on a rail spur near the Virginia border discovered similar remains in 1904. Local newspaper accounts describe the find in detail, including measurements taken by the county coroner. The bones were supposedly transferred to State Historical Society storage. That institution has no documentation of receiving them. The pattern repeated across multiple institutions and locations. Discovery reports existed in local newspapers, county records, and personal letters. Transfer documentation showed specimens sent to various academic facilities for study, yet the physical evidence never appeared in permanent collections. Archive searches conducted in later decades found gaps in record keeping, missing catalog numbers, and storage locations that could not be found or had been cleared without proper documentation of contents. Professor Edmund Thornley, who had led the Yale expedition to the original railroad site, tried to publish complete findings in 1901. His manuscript included detailed bone measurements, photographic documentation, and analysis of burial practices. The journal that initially accepted the work withdrew its publication offer without explanation. Thornley's personal papers, donated to Yale after his death in 1917, included letters showing pressure from unnamed sources to abandon his research into the Appalachian burial sites. One letter from a Smithsonian administrator suggested that continued investigation would damage his academic reputation and career prospects. Margaret Sinclair faced similar obstacles when trying to publish expanded analysis of Father Mercier's journals in 1903. Her manuscript, which connected oral histories with archaeological findings, was rejected by 7 academic presses. Reader reports kept in her personal archive cited concerns about sensationalism and lack of physical evidence to support extraordinary claims. One reviewer noted that regardless of documentation quality, the subject matter would not be taken seriously by the academic establishment. Harold Pittman's geological survey reports remained accessible in government archives, but his detailed descriptions of the stone fortifications created no follow-up investigations. When Pittman proposed a dedicated archaeological survey of the Highland structures in 1908, his request for funding was denied without review. A colleague at the survey office later told him privately that certain subjects were considered academically unproductive and potentially damaging to professional reputation. The suppression appeared coordinated yet left no clear evidence of organized conspiracy. No single institution or person could be identified as directing the pattern. Instead, evidence simply failed to survive the transition from initial discovery to permanent documentation. Specimens vanished during transfer between facilities. Publication opportunities disappeared after initial acceptance. Research funding proved impossible to secure. Academic careers suffered for those who kept investigating the subject. By 1920, the topic had effectively disappeared from scholarly discussion. The railroad dig site, the stone fortifications, the historical accounts, all remained in scattered records across multiple archives. But no active research continued. No new investigations were proposed. The academic community had moved on to subjects with better documentation and less controversial implications. A few researchers kept private interest. Sinclair continued collecting historical accounts until her death in 1931. Her files, donated to the Library of Congress, contained over 200 separate references to the Pale Giants from sources covering 3 centuries. The collection attracted no significant scholarly attention. It sat largely untouched in the manuscript division, catalogued but unexamined, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Modern genetic research offers tantalizing hints without providing clear answers. Population studies conducted in the 1990s and early 2000s identified unusual genetic markers in isolated Appalachian communities that suggest prehistoric population mixing from sources not yet fully understood. These markers appear most frequently in families with documented multi-generational residence in the highest elevation regions, particularly areas matching the ancient fortification sites documented by Harold Pittman. Dr. Rachel Kierstead, a geneticist at the University of Tennessee, published findings in 2004 examining mitochondrial DNA from participants in a regional health study. Her analysis revealed haplogroups that did not match expected patterns for Native American, European, or African ancestry. The markers suggested genetic contributions from a population that either came before known migration patterns into North America or represented an unidentified source group that later disappeared from the genetic record. Kierstead noted that the sample size remained too small for definitive conclusions, but the oddities warranted further investigation. That investigation never received funding. Kersted's grant applications were consistently rejected despite strong preliminary data. Review comments cited methodological concerns and insufficient justification for the proposed research scope. She abandoned the project in 2007 after her department chair suggested that pursuing controversial topics might risk her tenure evaluation. The genetic samples remained in storage at the university, preserved but unanalyzed. Archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR technology have revealed extensive structural remains throughout the Appalachian highlands that conventional digging never documented. A Forestry Service mapping project in 2012 accidentally discovered a complex of stone foundations beneath heavy forest cover in eastern Kentucky. The structures showed sophisticated layout patterns, suggesting planned community organization rather than random settlement. Their positioning and construction matched descriptions from the 1905 geological surveys. No archaeological dig of the site has been authorized despite repeated proposals from research teams. Similar discoveries came from LiDAR data collected for environmental monitoring purposes. Elevation maps revealed geometric patterns consistent with ancient earthworks at multiple locations across Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. The scale and distribution suggested a much larger population presence than previously documented. Yet these findings created minimal academic interest. The data exists in Forestry Service archives, available to researchers who know to request it, but effectively invisible to those unaware of its importance. The stone fortifications remain where Pittman documented them over a century ago. Hikers occasionally encounter these structures, usually mistaking them for natural rock formations or assuming they represent forgotten homestead boundaries from the 1800s. The walls stand silent on remote ridgelines, slowly giving way to root invasion and freeze-thaw cycles, gradually losing definition as forests reclaim the mountain heights. Local oral traditions continue in some communities. Families with deep roots in the region still tell stories about the old ones who lived in the high places, though most frame these as folklore rather than history. A few elders maintain that certain mountain areas should be avoided, that some locations remain touched by presences that came before current memory. These warnings are rarely followed by outsiders who lack the generational context to understand their importance. The question remains unanswered and perhaps unanswerable with current evidence. Who are these people? Where did they come from? What caused their decline? Why did they choose such extreme isolation? The mountains keep their secrets, and the academic establishment shows little interest in asking questions that might prove too difficult to answer within comfortable thinking frameworks. The pale giants remain suspended between documented history and dismissed legend, their existence supported by too much evidence to ignore, yet too controversial to investigate thoroughly. They exist in the spaces between certainty and myth, where uncomfortable truths go to be forgotten. The evidence exists in fragments scattered across institutional archives, family collections, and geological surveys that never intended to document human history. No single place contains the complete picture. The railroad dig photographs sit in one archive, Father Mercier's journals in another, the genetic data in university storage, the LiDAR surveys in Forestry Service databases. Each piece tells part of a story that becomes visible only when examined together. Yet no institutional framework exists to help that combination happen. What comes from this fractured evidence is the outline of a population that lived in the highest Appalachian elevations for an unknown period, possibly centuries or longer, before disappearing sometime between 900 and 1200 CE. They were physically different from surrounding populations, standing between 7 and 8 feet tall with bone structure suggesting exceptional strength. They built sophisticated stone fortifications commanding strategic positions across hundreds of miles of mountain land. They lived in planned isolation from other groups, maintaining defensive positions that allowed watching valley activities while remaining separate from lowland communities. Their relationship with surrounding populations appeared complex and often hostile. Indigenous oral histories describe them as taking what they needed from valleys below, including livestock and occasionally people. Frontier accounts from the 1700s document similar patterns of livestock theft and unexplained disappearances in mountain regions. Yet the later encounters from the early 1800s show a population in dramatic decline, reduced to small family groups struggling to survive in increasingly difficult territories. The cause of their extinction remains guesswork. Bone evidence points to simultaneous pressures from disease, malnutrition, and violence during their final period. Whether these factors were related or coincidental cannot be determined from available data. Indigenous traditions suggest they simply weakened and vanished, pulling back deeper into the mountains until no trace remained. The archaeological record supports a relatively rapid population collapse occurring over perhaps 2 or 3 generations. Modern science offers limited insight. The genetic oddities identified in isolated Appalachian communities suggest prehistoric population mixing, but the source remains unidentified. The structural remains documented through remote sensing technology confirm extensive highland living by a sophisticated culture, but dig proposals consistently fail to secure funding or institutional support. The physical evidence that might answer fundamental questions about origins, culture, and ultimate fate disappeared from institutional collections within decades of discovery. What makes this mystery particularly frustrating is not the absence of evidence, but its systematic exclusion from serious scholarly consideration. The documentation exists, The oral histories span centuries and cross multiple cultures with remarkable consistency. The physical remains were examined by properly credentialed researchers who documented their findings thoroughly. Yet academic discussion treats the subject as fringe speculation despite source material that would be considered compelling in other historical contexts. The Pale Giants ruled Appalachia before recorded history began, built fortifications that still stand today and vanished, leaving only scattered bones and stone walls as evidence of their existence. They terrified the people who met them, dominated strategic mountain territories, and then disappeared so completely that their very existence became questionable. The mountains remember, even if academic institutions choose to forget. Somewhere in those highlands, perhaps in caves not yet discovered or burial sites still hidden beneath forest growth, more evidence waits. Whether anyone will ever be allowed to search for it remains an open question. The truth exists in pieces, waiting for someone willing to put them together despite the professional costs of investigating a subject the establishment prefers to ignore. Until then, the Pale Giants remain where they have always been, suspended between history and legend, documented but dismissed. Evidence of something that challenges our understanding of who lived on this continent and when. If the evidence you just saw creates a fire in you, a sense of deep historic betrayal, do not let that feeling fade. Hit like and subscribe now. We are the front line against the lies. We are tearing down the comfortable, made-up reality that has been handed to us by the institutional gatekeepers of the past. You now carry this burden of knowledge. Share this video with every person you know who is tired of the official story, who is hungry for what they've been denied. The truth is not just scattered, it has been viciously buried. We will keep digging. We will expose every piece. Your action is our fuel.